This tree is about to be treated against spider mites. Spider mites are one of the banes of the bonsai grower, and if you have bonsai you might run into spider mites, and the problem is they are so small you don't typically see them until it is a well secured infestation on your tree. How do you recognize spider mites? How do you treat them, and why do they keep coming back? And what can you do against them coming back? That is in this video. First of all, spider mites. What are they? They are not insects. So if you just go to a store and buy a generic insecticide, it typically does not kill spider mites. No, spider mites are spidery mites. So they fall under the group of spiders, and within that under the mites. Now they are very, very small. They are smaller than a grain of sand. You barely can see them with your bare eye. So if you see a small dot moving around in your tree very quickly, that is not a spider mite. Chances are that's a predatory mite. Anything that moves very quickly in your tree is hunting rather than sucking. The sucking insects are typically slower. So spider mites, they sit in your tree, they move around, they're tiny little red dots normally, and they make very, very fine webbing. Don't confuse this with regular spider webs that sit as a large web between branches. No, they make very fine webbing that lay over the branches or over the leaves, and sometimes there's a very thin line from one branch to the other, but that is about the extent of it. So if you don't see them that easily that way, how do you see them? Clearly you see them based on what the foliage looks like, and you have a very, very simple test, and I'll show you the simple test in a second. Before we go there, which plant species typically get spider mite and when? When it comes to bonsai, very often junipers are the ones that people have spider mites on, and that is also the first time that they realize that spider mites exist. Why junipers? Well, junipers typically like to be in full sun. They create a very, very dense canopy within which it is quite humid and there's little airflow, and that is actually the optimal condition for spider mites to develop. They like their area, their environment to be pretty dry. They don't like a lot of wind or draft, and they like shelter. So in a very dense packed environment, that is where spider mites develop very quickly. So juniper is a species that very quickly gets it, and in fact this juniper had spider mite earlier this year. And what you can see here, this is the typical damage that you get from a spider mite. You see that the inner foliage starts to yellow, starts to die off, stops growing, all the growing tips are dying off, and you can't find any explanation except for something must be eating it and I can't figure out why. Well, I'm going to show you in a second how you can figure out why. Next to that, of course, this is a ficus, and ficus can get spider mites, but typically they get it when they're inside for winter. There's low light, so your plant is a little bit weaker. It sits in a fairly dry environment, and yeah, the whole tree is dry. So for the tree that is not a great environment, and for spider mites it is. So if you see growth stalling, you see the leaves getting a little bit dull, you find very fine webbing over the leaves, then you know I've got a spider mite infection. Now what you see here is a clear indication of the presence of spider mites. You see all these little things hanging around. Also here there's something there. That means that there's tiny little webs there. Hardly visible, but it's there. And I think on camera you can't see it, but here there are actually some web fibers as well hanging down. At the same time you can see that the leaves get dull on the bottom, but it's hard to tell because in this case there's a lot of scale on the leaves. But still, if you look closely, you see they're not as happy and as green as they could be. All signs that this tree is suffering from spider mite. Now these are just two of the species. In fact, all trees can get spider mites. Some are more easily affected than others, but these are the two species where it is very commonly seen when you're just starting out growing bonsai. So this gentle webbing that you see here between these branches here, that is not spider mite. This is an actual spider. And in fact, if you're going to spray this tree, try to see whether you can find the spider and take it out, because miticide of course also kills the spiders, and spiders are very beneficial. Now what we are looking for is branches that look like this. Now this tree had spider mites earlier this year, and the inside of the tree has been completely sucked empty. This is a Juniper sinensis blau, and you see only the edges of the branches are still in full color. And now if I open this up, you see here, this is tiny fine webbing on the inside. This is a very clear sign that this tree still has some mites in there, and I need to retreat it. And if I open up more of these branches, everywhere I see very, very fine webbing, just like this on the inside. But this discoloration of the foliage on the inside is a very clear sign that there is something going on your tree, and most likely it is mites. So you really need to test. Now, if you'd like to confirm that you have spider mites, you just take a piece of white paper or cardboard, hold it underneath the branch that you want to test, and you just quite harshly slap it around, and then, well, that's a real spider. That's interesting. Go. And then you move your hand over it. You see all these little red stripes on there, all these little lines. Those are all individual spider mites that I've just crushed on the piece of paper. They're really that small that you don't easily see them, but they're on this piece of paper after slapping the branch a little bit around. So this needs to be treated. Now here you can see another tree with an advanced state of spider mite infection. You see the inner scale foliage is quite dull. It is almost silvery, and the outside you see is still green and growing, but not for long. Looking further in the inside already, here you see also the yellowing of the older foliage. And yeah, here this is telltale. This is what it looks like. Let's see if I can get this. So silvery inner foliage with outer green edges because of this growing season, but that will also turn silver in the next couple of weeks, and then slowly all the growing tips will die off. And this is really the final stage of a spider mite infection, where if you don't treat it, the whole tree can die. Here you already see all the inner foliage is dying off. We only have a few growing edge ends here that are still alive, but on the inside it really is dying off. And this branch in the back really nicely illustrates how this spreads, right? It has started here in the bottom where it is nice and dense, and then it is working its way up along the main branch, infecting first the inside of the branches and slowly moving out and up. I hope that helped. If it did, put me a comment down below. If it didn't, put me a comment down below. If you like my videos, hit the subscribe button. Now, is it possible to prevent spider mites? Not really. They're everywhere. It is, however, good to keep in mind they spread quite easily. So if you have an infection on one tree, the other trees might also be infected. So try to separate your trees a little bit and don't push them into each other. If you have multiple junipers and one of them is infected, assume all of them are infected and treat all of them in the same cycle. Trees that grow healthily, are strong and well fertilized and well watered, are less susceptible to them. So that is a way to keep them away. And a treatment of winter oil in the late winter, just as the trees are waking up, that's also when the mites are waking up, is a very good way to reduce the infection rate in early spring. But as summer hits, it gets dry and sunny, then yeah, some people spray every 2 weeks or so. I don't. I just spray when I see the symptoms. But this year I'm less mobile. I've missed a few of them, and now all my trees are infected and I need to spray my whole collection 2 or 3 times over the next month. How do you treat spider mite? Now, spider mites can be annoying. They reproduce within 5 or 6 days after getting out of the egg, and most treatments don't really affect the eggs. So that means that after about 4 or 5 days you need to respray, and ideally do that 2 or 3 times so you make sure to get everything. And on top of that, because they reproduce very, very quickly in large numbers, they do get resistant to poisons quite quickly. So what I have 2 different products that I use, both of the same manufacturer. I always check, and on the label it says it works against spider mites. One is called Spruzit, and one is called Promonal. These 2 are against general insect damage and spider mites. So it has an insecticide and a miticide in there. Now, I don't know what the active ingredient is. I could probably find it in here. It's oil, pyrethine. Don't think it is actually poison. I think it just treats the animals itself and stops them from breeding and suffocates them. But anyway, that will work, and I'm just going to spray this whole tree until it is dripping wet. And then, yeah, do that again in 4 or 5 days. Ideally, you do this in the day that it is nice and dry weather, so it really gets absorbed by everything, it covers everything, and it isn't flushed away by the next rainstorm. Naturally, this needs to be dissolved in water. And if you're treating your trees, a lot of trees don't really like it to be in full sun after they've been treated with oils. So I personally, if I use this sort of material, I just use it, spray it, and then put the tree out of full sun, but also out of the rain. Always read the directions 20 milliliters in 1 liter. I have 2 liters, so that is 40 milliliters go into this. These packages come with a very nice cup for measuring, and keep in mind personal protection is important, so don't get overly generous and flush it over yourself. I try to just not touch it, but you could of course use gloves. Although, as I said, I don't believe this is really poison. It is just an oil / soap based treatment. Add water, shake well, and then of course you spray the plant until it drips on all sides. Pay particular attention, of course, to the inside of the tree, the dense clusters of foliage. That really needs to be soaking wet afterwards. Well, this was Jelle, growing bonsai. I hope you liked this. If you did and you're not subscribed, there's a button down below. Leave me a comment what you thought of this video, what my next topic should be, and I will see you next time in the next video. Keep growing bonsai, and bye.